Welcome, traveler through time. Find a comfortable place to rest. Let your breathing slow, let the tension of the modern world fall away. We are embarking on a journey to experience Christmas as it was truly lived in medieval times, not the sanitized version of carols and nostalgia, but the real, complex, sensory experience of the season that meant so much to people of that era. Close your eyes and let yourself drift backward through the centuries. Past electric lights and plastic trees, past Victorian sentimentality and commercial excess, past the Protestant Reformation and the Renaissance, back to a time when Christmas was something altogether different. Deeper and stranger, more sacred and more profane, longer and more intense than anything we experience today. We arrive in late December of the year 1362. The place is England, though the experience we'll witness was similar across all of Christian Europe. The date is December 24th, Christmas Eve, and the anticipation that has been building for weeks is reaching its peak. Take a deep breath and let yourself settle into this time, this place, this moment when the darkest days of winter are about to be transformed by light and celebration. Christmas in the Middle Ages was not a single day. It was a season, a tide, stretching from Christmas Eve through the Feast of the Epiphany on January 6th. 12 days of feasting and celebration, of religious devotion and secular revelry, of a world turned temporarily upside down. For people living in an era marked by hardship and hierarchy, these 12 days represented something precious, a break from the ordinary, a time when even the poorest could expect to eat well and when the normal rules of society were relaxed, if not suspended entirely. But before we witness the feast, we must understand what came before. Christmas was preceded by Advent, a season of fasting and preparation lasting for weeks. The medieval church prescribed abstinence from meat, from rich foods, from celebration. Advent was meant to be a time of spiritual preparation, of penance and prayer, making ready the soul for the arrival of Christ. For common people, this meant their already modest diet became even more restricted. Root vegetables, dried fish, dark bread, thin soups. The body was denied so that the spirit might be ready. This context matters because it makes what comes next so much more powerful. After weeks of fasting, after the long darkness of December, after the cold and hunger and hardship, Christmas arrives like an explosion of light and warmth and abundance. Let us begin in a great castle, high on a hill, visible for miles around. This is the seat of an earl, one of the great lords of the realm, a man who commands the loyalty of hundreds of knights and the labor of thousands of peasants. The castle is a massive structure of grey stone, with high walls and towers, with a great hall that can hold hundreds of people. Tonight, the castle is preparing for a celebration that will be talked about for months to come. The winter sun is setting early, as it always does in December, painting the sky in shades of deep orange and purple. The castle walls loom dark against this colorful sky. The windows of the great hall do not glow with electric light, but the warm, flickering illumination of hundreds of candles and massive fires in the hearths. As we draw closer, we can hear sounds drifting from the castle. Music, laughter, voices raised in conversation and song. We can smell wood smoke and roasting meat, bread baking and spices heating. The scents are rich and complex, promising abundance after weeks of denial. The castle gates stand open, which is unusual. Normally, castle gates are closed and guarded, symbols of exclusion and military might. But during Christmas, there is an old tradition of hospitality, of opening doors to travelers and strangers. The Earl, like all great lords, is expected to demonstrate his wealth and generosity during this season, to feast not just his household but also those who seek his charity. We pass through the gates into the outer bailey, the courtyard between the outer and inner walls. Even here, there is activity. Servants rush back and forth carrying supplies. Torches burn in iron brackets along the walls. A group of minstrels has gathered near the inner gate, tuning their instruments, a lute, a rebec, a small drum. They are not part of the Earl's household but traveling entertainers hoping to be invited in to perform for their supper. Let us pass through the inner gate into the heart of the castle. The noise and light intensify. We are in the inner courtyard now, and before us looms the Great Hall, the largest building in the complex. Its doors stand open, and light and warmth pour out into the cold December night. We step inside, and the sensory experience is overwhelming. The Great Hall is enormous, perhaps 80 feet long and 40 feet wide, with a ceiling that soars 30 feet above the floor. The roof is supported by massive oak beams, dark with age and smoke. The walls are stone, but tonight they are hung with tapestries depicting hunting scenes, biblical stories, and the deeds of ancient heroes. These tapestries serve multiple purposes. They add color and beauty, they provide insulation against the cold, and they display the Earl's wealth and taste. The floor is covered with fresh rushes, green and fragrant, mixed with herbs, rosemary, lavender, and bay. As people walk, these herbs release their scent, sweetening the air. This is a special touch for Christmas. Normally the rushes are changed less frequently and smell accordingly. At the far end of the hall, on a raised platform called the dais, sits the high table where the Earl and his most honored guests will dine. The table is covered with white linen. It is being set with the finest plates and cups the castle possesses. Some are silver, gleaming in the firelight. Others are pewter, less valuable but still impressive. The table itself is a statement of wealth and power. Two massive fireplaces, one on each long wall of the hall, blaze with enormous fires. Whole logs, as thick as a man's torso, burn steadily, throwing waves of heat into the room. The fires are necessary not just for warmth but also for cooking. In front of each fireplace, suspended on iron chains, hang large cauldrons. In these cauldrons, various dishes simmer and stew. The smells are intoxicating. We can identify meat, certainly, after the weeks of Advent fasting. Beef, pork, venison. But also more complex aromas, spices that have traveled halfway around the world. Cinnamon from Ceylon, pepper from India, cloves from the distant Spice Islands. These spices are ferociously expensive, worth more by weight than silver, and using them liberally is another way the Earl displays his wealth. The hall is filling with people. The Earl's household consists of dozens of permanent residents, knights who serve him, officials who manage his estates, their wives and children, priests and scribes, servants of various ranks. But tonight there are also guests. Neighboring lords and ladies, traveling merchants who were caught by darkness and granted hospitality, pilgrims journeying to distant shrines, even some of the more prosperous peasants from the Earl's own estates who have been invited to witness and partake in their lord's generosity. The social hierarchy is visible in how people arrange themselves. Near the high table, closest to the lord, sit the most important guests and household members. Further down the hall, the status decreases gradually. At the very end of the hall, farthest from the high table and nearest to the doors where cold draughts enter, sit the lowest-ranking people who have been admitted, servants, poor travelers, landless knights hoping to find employment. But tonight, even those at the lowest tables will eat well. That is the promise of Christmas, the expectation that has sustained people through the fasting of Advent. Let us observe the arrival of the Earl himself. A hush falls over the hall as he appears, emerging from his private chambers that adjoin the hall. He is a man in his 50s, powerfully built despite his age, dressed in a long robe of deep crimson wool lined with fur. Around his neck hangs a heavy gold chain, a symbol of his rank and wealth. His hair and beard are gray, neatly trimmed. His face is weathered, marked by years of warfare and outdoor living, but his eyes are sharp and intelligent. Beside him walks his countess, a woman perhaps 10 years younger, elegant in a gown of blue silk embroidered with gold thread. Her hair is hidden under an elaborate headdress, as fashion and modesty dictate. She moves with grace and dignity, every inch the great lady, trained from childhood to manage large households and navigate complex social situations. Behind them comes their household, their grown children, their closest advisors, their personal priest who will bless the meal. They proceed to the high table, and as they do, everyone in the hall rises and bows or curtsies according to their rank. The Earl takes his seat at the center of the high table, the Countess at his right hand. This positioning is traditional, prescribed by centuries of custom. The Earl surveys the hall. This is his moment, his demonstration of power and generosity, and he is pleased. A trumpet sounds clear and bright, cutting through the noise of the hall. Silence falls. The Earl's chaplain, an elderly priest in black robes, steps forward and raises his hands. Everyone in the hall bows their heads. The blessing is in Latin, flowing and sonorous, thanking God for the bounty about to be received, asking blessings on the Earl and his household, commemorating the birth of Christ whose feast they celebrate. When the blessing ends, the Earl claps his hands, and the feast begins. Servants emerge from the kitchens carrying enormous platters. The first course arrives at the high table. This is traditional. The Lord and his most honored guests are always served first. What arrives is impressive even by the standards of noble feasting. There is a whole roasted peacock, redressed in its own feathers, its beak gilded with gold leaf, presented on a massive silver platter. This is a showpiece, meant to impress rather than necessarily to taste exceptional, though the meat is certainly edible. There are swans, also roasted and redressed. There are smaller birds, quail and thrush and partridge, dozens of them, arranged artfully on platters. There is venison, great haunches of it, carved and sauced with a complex mixture of wine, pepper, and exotic spices. There is pork, similarly prepared. There are fish, pike and salmon and lamprey, the latter being considered a particular delicacy despite their eel-like appearance. And there are subtleties, elaborate constructions made of sugar and marzipan, sculpted and painted to represent castles, ships, mythical beasts. These are edible sculptures, demonstrations of the skill of the Earl's cooks and the depth of his purse. As each dish is presented to the high table, the Earl and Countess take portions, and then the dish is carried to lower tables where others can partake. More dishes keep coming from the kitchens. This will go on for hours, course after course, a dizzying abundance. Between the courses, there is entertainment. The minstrels we saw earlier have been admitted and now play their instruments. Lively dance tunes, gentle ballads, bawdy songs that make the younger knights laugh and the ladies blush. A juggler performs, keeping multiple knives spinning in the air, a feat that seems almost magical in the flickering firelight. A man with a trained bear shows off the animal's tricks, the bear dancing clumsily to the music, though the bear looks tired and somewhat sad, and we might feel uncomfortable watching this entertainment that the medieval audience finds delightful. The wine flows freely. Unlike the common people who drink ale, the nobility drinks wine, imported from France or Spain or even further abroad. The wine is often spiced and heated. This is the origin of what we would call mulled wine, though the medieval version would be more heavily spiced and much stronger than what we're accustomed to. The spices used include cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and sometimes even pepper, creating a drink that is both warming and intoxicating. As the evening progresses, the noise level in the hall rises. Conversations become louder, laughter more frequent. The strict social hierarchy that normally governs behavior is relaxed slightly. This is part of the Christmas tradition, a time when normal rules can bend a little. A young knight might dare to speak more freely to a lord he would normally only address with utmost formality. A servant might share a joke with someone above his station and be answered with a laugh rather than a rebuke. But let us leave the castle for now and see how Christmas Eve is being celebrated elsewhere. We step back out into the cold December night, our ears ringing slightly from the noise of the great hall, our nostrils full of the smells of roasted meat and spices. We make our way down the hill from the castle, through the darkening landscape, toward a village that lies under the Earl's lordship. This is a similar village to the one we visited during the snowfall, perhaps even the same one, though weeks have passed since that winter night. The village is quieter than the castle, but it too is preparing to celebrate. From each cottage, smoke rises into the night sky. Through windows and around doors, warm light flickers. The church bells are ringing, calling the people to midnight mass, the most important service of the Christmas season. Let us enter one of the better-off peasant cottages, the home of a free farmer who owns his own land rather than working as a tenant. This family's Christmas will be modest compared to the Earl's feast, but it will still be special, a break from their ordinary diet and routine. The cottage is warm and crowded. The immediate family is here, husband, wife, 3 children. But also present are extended family members, a grandmother, a brother-in-law, cousins. Christmas is a time for family to gather, to share what they have, to strengthen the bonds that hold the community together. The evening meal has been prepared with care. After weeks of Advent fasting, there is meat tonight, a goose, roasted over the fire, its skin crisp and golden, its fat dripping and sizzling. A goose is a significant expense for a peasant family, but Christmas justifies it. There are also root vegetables roasted alongside the goose, turnips, parsnips, onions. There is fresh bread, white bread even, not the coarse dark rye bread of everyday eating. White bread is made from wheat flour and is expensive, normally eaten only by the wealthy, but at Christmas even peasant families try to have some. There is ale, of course, fresh brewed and stronger than the weak small beer consumed daily. And there might be a small amount of honey, precious and sweet, to be mixed with the ale or drizzled on the bread, a rare treat. The family eats together, crowded around their small table or sitting on stools near the fire. There is no elaborate service, no multiple courses, no servants. But there is abundance, relative to their normal meals, and there is joy. The children's eyes are bright with excitement. The adults smile and talk, the tensions and worries of daily life temporarily set aside. After the meal, they will go to church for midnight mass. This is not optional. Everyone in the village is expected to attend, and most want to. The church tonight will be transformed, as spectacular in its own way as the Earl's Great Hall, though on a much smaller scale. But before we go to the church, let us visit one more household, the poorest cottage in the village, home to a landless laborer and his family. This man owns no land, has no trade or skill, survives by hiring himself out for whatever work he can find. He is the lowest rung of medieval society above actual serfs, and life for him and his family is a constant struggle. Their cottage is smaller and cruder than the others. The walls are poorly maintained, the thatch is thin and leaking in places. The interior is dark and cold despite a small fire. The family consists of a man, a woman, and 4 young children. They are thin, all of them, marked by chronic undernourishment. Tonight, for Christmas Eve, they have a little meat, not a goose, but some bacon, a small amount, given to them as charity by the Lord's steward. They have some bread and ale, also provided through the traditional Christmas doles that the wealthy are expected to distribute to the poor. It is not much, but it is more than their usual fare, and the family receives it with genuine gratitude. This is the reality of medieval Christmas. It was a time of feasting and celebration, yes, but the quality of that feast depended entirely on your place in the social hierarchy. For the Earl and his castle, Christmas meant peacocks and swans and wine and elaborate entertainments. For the free farmer, it meant a goose and white bread and stronger than usual ale. For the landless laborer, it meant a bit of bacon and the assurance that he would not go completely hungry, at least for these 12 days. Yet all of them, from the Earl to the poorest laborer, will gather tonight in the church for midnight mass. In the house of God, at least in theory, all are equal. The Earl might have a better seat, a special pew, but he kneels on the same stone floor as the peasant. They all hear the same service, participate in the same rituals, receive the same blessing. Let us go now to the village church and witness this gathering, this moment when the entire community comes together to mark the birth of Christ and the promise of salvation. The church is transformed. Every available candle has been lit, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds if you count the small votive candles that parishioners have brought and placed before statues of saints. The effect is magical, the stone interior of the church glowing with warm, flickering light that dances across the walls and ceiling. The paintings on the walls, usually dim and hard to see, are suddenly vivid. The Last Judgment above the chancel arch shows Christ in glory, the saved ascending to heaven on his right, the damned descending to hell on his left. The images are meant to inspire both hope and fear, and tonight, in this light, they seem almost alive. The altar is decorated with holly and ivy, the green plants symbolizing eternal life. This is one of the few pagan traditions that the medieval church has absorbed. The use of evergreen plants in winter celebrations predates Christianity, but the church has given it new meaning, connecting it to theological concepts. The church is packed with people, every available space filled. The wealthy villagers, the free farmers, sit closer to the front. The poor stand in the back or crowd into the side aisles. Children, excited and restless, are everywhere. The smell of unwashed bodies, of smoke and cooking grease, of damp wool and leather, fills the air. But tonight there's also the sweet smell of incense, imported at great expense, being burned lavishly in honor of the feast. The priest enters, wearing his best vestments, not the simple black robe of everyday masses, but elaborate robes of white and gold, embroidered and decorated, vestments that are only brought out for the greatest feasts. He is accompanied by 2 acolytes, boys from the village who have been trained to assist at Mass, and they carry candles and swing censers of incense. The Mass begins. It is in Latin, which most of the people cannot understand, but that doesn't matter. They know the rhythms of the service, the movements and responses. They know when to kneel and when to stand, when to cross themselves and when to bow their heads. The Mass is not primarily about understanding words but about participating in a sacred ritual that connects them to God, to each other, to the long history of Christianity. The priest chants the liturgy, his voice echoing in the stone space. The congregation responds at the appropriate moments, their voices rough and untrained but sincere. At the most sacred moment, the consecration of the bread and wine, a profound silence falls. The priest elevates the host, and the people believe, truly believe, that they are witnessing a miracle, that the bread is becoming the body of Christ. Then the bell rings, clear and sweet, and the moment passes. The Mass continues through its ancient forms, moving toward completion. When it ends, the people file out of the church into the cold night. They do not rush home but linger, talking, wishing each other well, caught up in the spirit of the season. Neighbors who have been feuding find it easier to speak civilly tonight. Debts are forgiven. Small kindnesses are exchanged. This is part of the Christmas miracle too, not just the theological mystery celebrated in the Mass, but the human miracle of community and compassion, of people reaching across the barriers that normally divide them to connect as fellow humans, fellow Christians, fellow travelers through this difficult world. The night is late now, moving toward morning. The stars shine brilliantly in the cold, clear sky. The moon, nearly full, illuminates the landscape in shades of silver and shadow. Frost is forming on every surface, making the world sparkle. The people return to their homes, to their fires and their families. They sleep, most of them, a few hours of rest before the celebration continues tomorrow. Christmas Day awaits, with more feasting, more services, more celebration. But the heart of Christmas, the sacred mystery and the human connection, has already been accomplished here tonight in this small village church, in villages and churches across all of Christian Europe. Christmas morning arrives cold and bright. The sun rises late, as it always does in December, casting long golden rays across a landscape transformed by frost. Every surface glitters with ice crystals, every blade of grass, every bare branch, every stone. The world looks as though it has been dusted with diamonds, and the early morning light makes everything glow with an ethereal beauty. In the village, people are stirring earlier than they might on an ordinary day. There is excitement in the air, an anticipation that even the adults feel alongside the children. Christmas Day has arrived, and with it comes not just religious observance but the promise of continued feasting, of entertainment, of a break from the ordinary rhythms of life. The church bells begin to ring, calling people to the morning service. This will be the first of several services today. Christmas is too important a feast to be marked with just a single Mass. There will be services throughout the day, and the devout will attend multiple times, while others will attend once and spend the rest of the day in more secular celebrations. Let us return to the castle on the hill, where Christmas Day is beginning with particular splendor. The great hall, which was finally emptied and quieted in the early hours of the morning, is coming back to life. Servants are clearing away the remnants of last night's feast, replacing soiled rushes with fresh ones, building up the fires that burn low during the brief hours of darkness. The Earl and his household attend a private morning mass in the castle chapel, a smaller, more intimate space than the village church but exquisitely decorated. The chapel walls are painted with scenes from the life of Christ, and the altar is draped with cloths of silk embroidered with gold thread. The castle chaplain, who ranks higher than the village priest and has studied at a university, conducts a service that is both solemn and beautiful. After Mass, the household breaks its fast with a morning meal that would constitute a feast in most homes. There is bread still warm from the ovens, butter, cheese, cold meats left from last night's feast, ale and wine. The mood is relaxed, convivial. Even the Earl, normally somewhat distant and formal with his household, is more approachable today. He jokes with his knights, compliments his wife on her management of the feast, allows his children liberties he might not permit on ordinary days. This relaxation of normal formality is a key part of medieval Christmas. The season was associated with a temporary inversion of the usual social order, a time when the low could be made high and the high brought low, at least symbolically. This tradition had ancient roots, going back to the Roman Saturnalia, but the medieval church had Christianized it, connecting it to themes of humility and charity from the Gospels. The most dramatic expression of this inversion was the tradition of the Lord of Misrule, also called the Abbot of Unreason or the Boy Bishop. This was a person, often someone of low status, a servant, a young boy, sometimes even someone chosen at random, who was given temporary authority to preside over the Christmas festivities. The Lord of Misrule would wear mock regalia, sit in places of honor, give absurd commands that had to be obeyed, and generally turn the normal order of things upside down. Not every household or community observed this tradition to the same degree. Some places embraced it enthusiastically, with the Lord of Misrule exercising genuine, if temporary, power. Others treated it more symbolically, with the role being more ceremonial than functional. But the underlying principle, that Christmas was a time when normal rules could be suspended, was widely acknowledged. In the Earl's castle, the tradition is observed with a certain dignified restraint. A young page, a boy of perhaps 12 from a noble family sent to learn courtly ways, has been chosen as the Christmas Lord. He is dressed in a cape borrowed from the Earl himself, far too large for him, trailing on the ground as he walks. He wears a crown made of gilded paper and holly. He carries a wooden scepter that the castle carpenter made specially for the occasion. The boy takes his role seriously but also enjoys it. He is allowed to sit at the high table during the day's main feast. He is served first, before even the Earl. He makes proclamations, silly things, like declaring that everyone must hop on one foot when entering the hall, or that all conversation must be sung rather than spoken. These commands are met with laughter and mostly obeyed, at least for a few minutes, the absurdity of them being part of the fun. This tradition served several purposes. It was entertainment, certainly. It provided laughter and levity during the dark winter months. But it also served as a safety valve for social tensions. By allowing, even encouraging, mockery of authority and inversion of hierarchy, the ruling class paradoxically strengthened their own position. People could let off steam, could experience a brief taste of power or equality, and then return to their normal subordinate positions with perhaps less resentment. The main Christmas Day feast in the castle begins in the early afternoon and will continue for many hours. If last night's feast was impressive, today's is even more elaborate. The cooks have been working since before dawn, and course after course emerges from the kitchens. There are boar's heads, a traditional Christmas dish, presented on massive platters with apples in their mouths, garnished with rosemary and bay. The boar's head represents the old year being defeated, the wild being tamed, a symbol with deep pagan roots that Christianity has absorbed and reinterpreted. There are pies of every description, meat pies containing venison, beef, pork, sometimes all mixed together with fruits and spices. There are fish pies, despite this being a meat-eating day, because variety and abundance are the goals. There are fruit pies made with apples and pears carefully stored since autumn, sweetened with honey, or the precious imported sugar that only the wealthy can afford. There is a dish called frumenty, a sort of porridge made with wheat, milk, and spices, enriched with egg yolks and flavored with saffron, which gives it a golden color. Frumenty is traditional Christmas fare, rich and warming, and even peasant households will try to make some version of it for the holiday. There are jellies, made by boiling down bones and meat until they form a gelatinous substance, then flavoring and coloring it with various ingredients. These jellies are molded into elaborate shapes, castles, animals, geometric patterns. They wobble and shimmer in the candlelight, another demonstration of the cook's skill and the host's wealth. The spices used in these dishes are remarkable not just for their flavor but for what they represent. Each grain of pepper, each stick of cinnamon, each clove has traveled thousands of miles, passing through dozens of hands, surviving shipwrecks and storms and bandits. These spices are quite literally worth their weight in precious metals, and using them liberally is a statement of power and connection to the wider world. Between the courses, the entertainment continues. The minstrels play, but today there are also other performers. A troupe of traveling actors presents a brief play, a mystery play depicting the Nativity. The performance is simple but effective. A young man wrapped in blue cloth plays Mary, another plays Joseph, a real infant borrowed from the village plays the baby Jesus. The actors speak in English, not Latin, making the story accessible to everyone, and there's something moving about seeing the familiar biblical story enacted here in the Great Hall, making it immediate and real. There are also acrobats who tumble and flip with remarkable agility. There is a man who eats fire, taking burning torches into his mouth, and somehow not being burned, a trick that seems genuinely magical and slightly terrifying. There is a woman who sings ballads, her voice pure and clear, telling stories of ancient heroes and tragic lovers. The wine and ale flow continuously. Servants move through the hall constantly, refilling cups, never letting anyone's drink run dry. People become louder, merrier, more uninhibited as the afternoon wears on. Inhibitions fade. Knights who are normally models of chivalric restraint laugh uproariously at crude jokes. Ladies who are usually the picture of decorum clap along to bawdy songs. But even in the midst of this revelry, there are reminders of the religious significance of the day. At regular intervals, the Earl's chaplain rises and offers a prayer or a reading from Scripture. The celebration is Christian, sanctioned by the Church, and must maintain at least a veneer of piety. The balance between sacred and profane, between devotion and indulgence, is delicate and occasionally uncomfortable. Meanwhile, in the village below, Christmas Day is being celebrated with equal enthusiasm if less grandeur. The village holds its own feast in the church hall, a building adjacent to the church used for community gatherings. The food is simpler than what's served in the castle: roasted meats, pottages enriched with whatever the families could contribute, bread, ale, and simple puddings. But there is enough for everyone, and that itself is remarkable. The village has its own traditions. There is dancing in the square, country dances where everyone participates, forming circles and lines, the steps passed down through generations. There is no prohibition against dancing despite it being a holy day. The medieval church's attitude toward dancing was complex and inconsistent, sometimes condemning it as sinful, sometimes tolerating it as harmless recreation. There are games. Children play hoodman blind, what we would call blind men's bluff, chasing each other while blindfolded, their laughter ringing across the square. Adults play football, a violent, chaotic game with few rules, played between neighboring villages, the ball kicked and carried and fought over across fields and streams. People are injured in these games regularly, sometimes seriously, but the tradition persists because it provides an outlet for aggression and competition. There is also mumming, a tradition where people dress in costumes and masks and go from house to house performing brief skits or songs in exchange for food and drink. The mummers represent characters from folklore: a fool, a king, a dragon, a hero. Their performances are often bawdy and satirical, poking fun at local figures and current events. The anonymity provided by the masks allows for a freedom of expression that would be dangerous without it. As afternoon fades into evening, both in the castle and in the village, the celebrations take on a different character. The eating and drinking continue, but now there is more focus on fire and light. Bonfires are lit in the castle courtyard and on the village green. These are substantial fires, great pyramids of wood that burn hot and bright, pushing back the darkness, providing warmth and a focal point for continued gathering. The symbolism of light during Christmas is profound. This is the darkest time of the year, when the sun is at its weakest, when nights are longest and coldest. The birth of Christ is celebrated as the coming of light into darkness, and literal light, in the form of candles, fires, torches, becomes deeply meaningful. Every flame is a defiance of the dark, a promise that winter will end, that light will return, that life will continue. Around the bonfires, people gather to sing. The songs are both sacred and secular. There are hymns in Latin, sung by those who know them, often the clergy and educated members of the household. There are carols in English, simpler songs that tell the Christmas story in ways ordinary people can understand and remember. The word carol originally meant a circle dance, and some of these songs are accompanied by dancing, people holding hands and moving in circles around the fires. There are also older songs, songs that predate Christianity, songs about the return of the sun and the defeat of winter. The medieval Christmas is a palimpsest, layers of tradition built up over centuries, pagan and Christian elements intermingled in ways that contemporary people probably didn't even fully recognize. As the evening deepens and the fires burn lower, there is a sense of contentment settling over the celebrations. Bellies are full. The worst of the cold is kept at bay. Community bonds have been reinforced. The religious mysteries have been observed. Both the sacred obligations and the secular pleasures of the season have been honored. But Christmas is far from over. This is only the first full day of a 12-day celebration. Tomorrow will be the feast of Saint Stephen, the first Christian martyr. The day after will be the feast of Saint John the Evangelist. The day after that, the feast of the Holy Innocents, commemorating the children killed by Herod. Each of these days has its own traditions, its own character, its own balance of solemnity and celebration. And beyond these saints' days, there are the days between Christmas and New Year, days that belong to no particular saint, days that are given over almost entirely to feasting and entertainment. Then comes New Year itself, which in the medieval calendar was not January 1st but varied by region. Some places celebrated it on March 25th, the feast of the Annunciation. But regardless of when the new year officially began, the days after Christmas were a time of looking both backward and forward, of reflection and anticipation. Finally, there is Epiphany on January 6th, the 12th day of Christmas, commemorating the visit of the Magi to the infant Jesus. Epiphany marks the end of the Christmas season, and it is celebrated with particular intensity, one last great feast before the season concludes and ordinary time returns. Let us return to the castle one more time as Christmas Day draws to its close. The great hall is quieter now, though still occupied. Some people have retired to bed, exhausted by the day's activities. Others remain, sitting around the fires, talking in low voices, reluctant to let the day end completely. The Earl sits in his great chair, the Christmas Lord asleep in his lap, the boy having finally surrendered to exhaustion. The Earl's hand rests gently on the child's head, a gesture that is almost tender. The Countess sits nearby, working on her embroidery even at this late hour, her fingers moving automatically through stitches she has made thousands of times before. A minstrel plays quietly, not for attention or applause but simply because he loves music, because the moment calls for it. The tune is melancholy and beautiful, a counterpoint to the day's exuberance, a reminder that even joy is transient, that even Christmas will end. In the village, a similar quiet is descending. The bonfires have burned down to glowing coals. Most families have returned to their cottages. The church stands dark and silent, having hosted multiple services throughout the day, now resting before tomorrow's observances. But the spirit of Christmas lingers. In full bellies and warm hearts. In the memory of laughter and song. In the renewed sense of community and connection. In the hope that the light will continue to grow, that spring will come, that life will go on. The medieval Christmas was many things: a religious feast, a social obligation, an economic display, a time of inversion and release, a celebration of light and darkness, a marking of time, a connection to the past and the future. It was messy and complicated, sacred and profane, beautiful and sometimes cruel. Much like the medieval world itself. As Christmas Day ends and the second day of the season approaches, the celebration continues, but with a slightly different character. The initial explosion of feasting and festivity gives way to something more sustained, more relaxed. The sense of anticipation is replaced by a sense of dwelling in the moment, of savoring these special days while they last. Let us rest now, letting the scenes of Christmas Day fade into memory, preparing ourselves to witness more of this remarkable season, this time when the medieval world paused its ordinary business and gave itself over to celebration and devotion, to excess and meaning, to the complex, contradictory, deeply human experience of Christmas in the Middle Ages. The days between Christmas and Epiphany unfold with a rhythm that is both structured and spontaneous. Each day has its own character, shaped by the saints being commemorated and by the accumulated traditions that have grown up around this season over centuries. December 26th is the feast of Saint Stephen, the first Christian martyr, stoned to death for his faith in the days after Christ's crucifixion. The contrast between celebrating a martyr's death and the joyful feasting of Christmas might seem jarring to us, but for medieval people, this juxtaposition made sense. Christianity was built on paradox: life through death, strength through weakness, joy through suffering. Saint Stephen's feast reminded celebrants that the infant whose birth they celebrated would himself die violently, that faith sometimes required sacrifice. On Saint Stephen's Day, there is a tradition of charity that goes beyond the general hospitality of the season. This is the day when the wealthy are particularly expected to give alms to the poor, to distribute food and clothing and coin to those in need. The Church emphasizes this obligation, and social pressure reinforces it. A lord who fails to be generous on St. Stephen's Day risks his reputation, and reputation matters enormously in medieval society where power rests partly on personal honor and the loyalty of followers. In many places, there is also a tradition of wassailing on St. Stephen's Day. Wassail comes from the Old English phrase meaning to be in good health, and wassailing involves going from house to house with a bowl of spiced ale or cider, offering drinks and receiving gifts in return. The wassail bowl itself becomes a focal point of celebration, often decorated with ribbons and greenery, filled with a warming mixture of ale, sugar, spices, and roasted apples. The wassailers sing as they go, traditional songs that wish health and prosperity to the households they visit. These songs often have ancient roots, predating Christianity, invoking blessings on orchards and livestock, asking for abundance in the coming year. The medieval church was pragmatic about such traditions. As long as they didn't directly contradict Christian teaching, they could be tolerated and even absorbed into the Christmas celebration. December 27th brings the feast of St. John the Evangelist, the beloved disciple who wrote the fourth Gospel. The traditions associated with this day are quieter, more contemplative. Wine is blessed in church, and drinking this blessed wine is thought to bring protection against poison and illness. St. John's association with wine comes from a legend that he once drank poisoned wine without being harmed, the poison rendered harmless by his faith. In some regions, there is a tradition of particular kindness to animals on St. John's Day, reflecting the saint's gentle character and his teaching about God's love extending to all creation. Livestock are given extra feed, horses are allowed to rest, even working animals like oxen and donkeys are given special treatment. This is practical as well as symbolic. The animals have worked hard through harvest and autumn, and a period of rest helps them survive the winter and be ready for spring plowing. December 28th is the Feast of the Holy Innocents, commemorating the male infants killed by King Herod in his attempt to eliminate the infant Jesus. This is the darkest day of the Christmas season, a reminder of the violence and tragedy that surrounded Christ's birth, of the price paid by others for his survival. Traditions on this day are somber. In some places, children are given symbolic authority, a reversal similar to the Lord of Misrule but with a more serious tone. The boy bishop tradition, where a young chorister is dressed as a bishop and given temporary ecclesiastical authority, often occurs on this day. The child bishop presides over services, gives blessings, even delivers sermons, all while dressed in miniature versions of episcopal vestments. This tradition served multiple purposes. It educated children in religious ritual and responsibility. It reminded adults of Christ's teaching about becoming like children to enter the kingdom of heaven. And it provided a moment of innocence and purity in the midst of a season that could become quite debauched with its constant feasting and drinking. The days that follow have no major feast attached to them, and they become a kind of extended holiday, days given over almost entirely to entertainment and excess. This is when the Christmas season reaches its peak of secular celebration, when the balance between sacred and profane tips decidedly toward the profane. Let us now shift our perspective and witness how Christmas was celebrated at the highest levels of medieval society, in the courts of kings. The royal Christmas was Christmas writ large, everything amplified to extraordinary scale. Where an earl might feast 100 people, a king would feast thousands. Where a baron might give his lord of Misrule a paper crown, a king might stage elaborate pageants and tournaments. Imagine we are at the court of Edward III of England in the year 1363, 2 decades after the great victory at Crecy, during the height of English power and confidence. The king has chosen to hold his Christmas court at Windsor Castle, the massive fortress that overlooks the Thames Valley, one of the great symbols of royal power. Windsor at Christmas is transformed into something approaching a medieval person's vision of paradise. Every hall and chamber is decorated with evergreen boughs, with holly and ivy and mistletoe, with banners and tapestries depicting the king's heraldry and his glorious deeds. Hundreds of candles burn in elaborate candelabras. The fires in the great hearths are so large that whole trees are consumed. The king's household at Christmas numbers in the thousands. There are his immediate family, the queen, his sons including the Black Prince, his daughters and their husbands. There are the great nobles of the realm, the earls and barons who hold their lands from the king and owe him service and counsel. There are foreign dignitaries, ambassadors from France and Scotland and more distant kingdoms, all come to witness English power and participate in English hospitality. There are knights by the hundreds, members of the royal household or vassals of the great nobles. There are clergy, bishops and abbots, the Archbishop of Canterbury himself, priests and monks and friars. There are officials, the Chancellor, the Treasurer, the Marshal, dozens of others whose work keeps the complex machinery of government functioning. There are servants beyond counting, cooks and servers, grooms and pages, washerwomen and seamstresses, the invisible army that makes royal life possible. The feasting at the royal court is on a scale difficult to comprehend. The kitchens at Windsor are enormous, multiple buildings where dozens of cooks and their assistants work around the clock during the Christmas season. Whole oxen are roasted on massive spits turned by boys who stand for hours in the heat and smoke. Hundreds of capons, dozens of swans and peacocks, countless smaller birds are prepared daily. The spices used would constitute a fortune. Saffron by the pound, pepper by the sack, cinnamon, ginger, cloves, nutmeg, mace, all imported at enormous expense from the far reaches of the known world. The king's cooks compete to create ever more elaborate dishes that are as much sculpture as food, designed to impress and overwhelm before they are eaten. There are subtleties beyond anything seen in lesser establishments. Sugar sculptures depicting entire battle scenes, with tiny soldiers and horses all molded and painted in realistic detail. Marzipan castles with working drawbridges. Jellies formed into the shapes of mythical beasts, and set with gold leaf so they seem to glow in the candlelight. The entertainment at the royal Christmas is similarly spectacular. The king maintains a large company of minstrels, the finest musicians in the kingdom, and they play constantly throughout the festivities. There are trumpeters who announce each course of the feast with elaborate fanfares. There are lutists and harpists who play during quieter moments. There are singers who perform complex polyphonic pieces, their voices weaving together in harmonies that seem almost supernatural in their beauty. But there is also more exotic entertainment. Bear baiting and bull baiting, blood sports that we would find horrifying but that medieval audiences found thrilling. Jugglers and acrobats who perform feats of such skill and daring that they seem impossible. Magicians and illusionists who create effects that blur the line between trickery and actual sorcery, always careful to present their work as clever deception rather than genuine magic, which would be heretical. There are elaborate masks, theatrical performances that combine acting, dance, music, and spectacular visual effects. These masks often involve the king and other nobles themselves as performers, elaborately costumed and masked, acting out allegorical scenes that flatter the king and celebrate his virtues and victories. The famous Round Table tradition associated with King Arthur is sometimes evoked at royal Christmas celebrations. Edward III was particularly devoted to Arthurian legend and founded the Order of the Garter, a chivalric order modeled on the supposed Knights of the Round Table. At Christmas, there might be a tournament in the Arthurian style, with knights taking on the names and identities of legendary heroes, fighting elaborate mock battles that blur the line between sport and theater. These tournaments are spectacular affairs. Knights in full armor, their surcoats emblazoned with heraldic devices, mounted on massive destriers, charge at each other with lances in the tiltyard. The sound of lance on shield, of steel on steel, rings across the courtyard. Horses scream and rear. Men are unhorsed and sometimes injured, despite the lances being blunted and the combat being theoretically restrained. The ladies watch from specially constructed galleries, their favor sought by the competing knights. The whole elaborate ritual of courtly love is on display, knights dedicating their combat to particular ladies, wearing their tokens, fighting with exaggerated gallantry. It is all performance, all theater, but taken very seriously by the participants. The religious observance at the royal court is as elaborate as everything else. The king has his own chapel, of course, magnificently decorated, with an organ and a choir of trained singers. Services are conducted with perfect ceremony, every gesture and word prescribed by centuries of tradition. The king participates devoutly, or at least publicly. He attends multiple services daily during the Christmas season, takes communion, makes generous offerings to the church. But there is something performative about royal piety, a sense that the king's devotion is as much about demonstrating proper kingship as about genuine spiritual feeling. The king must be seen to be pious, to honor God and the church, because his authority is theoretically derived from God. A king who appeared impious would undermine his own legitimacy. The costs of a royal Christmas are staggering. Feeding and housing thousands of people for 12 days, providing entertainment, giving appropriate gifts to hundreds of nobles and officials, all of this consumes a substantial portion of the royal treasury. But these costs are considered necessary. A king demonstrates his power partly through such displays. A magnificent Christmas tells everyone, his own subjects, foreign observers, potential enemies, that he is wealthy, powerful, secure. It's a form of political theater, diplomacy conducted through feasting and spectacle. After several days at the royal court, the intensity becomes almost overwhelming. The constant noise, the crowds, the endless rounds of eating and drinking and entertainment, the need to always be on display, always performing your role in the elaborate social hierarchy. Even the privileged courtiers sometimes seek escape, slipping away to quieter chambers or taking walks in the castle gardens despite the cold. Let us leave the royal court now and return to more modest celebrations. We shift our attention to a monastery, a Benedictine abbey in the countryside, where Christmas is being celebrated in yet another way. Monastic Christmas is more austere than celebration in the secular world, but it is not without its own form of abundance. Monks live under a rule of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and their daily life is structured around prayer and work. But Christmas is a time when even the monastic rule is relaxed slightly, when the ordinary restrictions are eased. The monastery church is the heart of the celebration. Monks are required to attend 8 services daily throughout the year, the canonical hours that structure their days. During Christmas, these services become more elaborate, longer, more beautiful. The plain chant that monks sing is elevated, more complex pieces reserved for great feasts. The abbot wears his finest vestments. Every available candle is lit, making the church glow with warm light that reflects off the gilded altar, the silver candlesticks, the embroidered hangings. The monks' Christmas dinner is held in the refectory, the communal dining hall. Normally, monks eat in silence while one of their number reads aloud from scripture or from the lives of saints. During Christmas, this rule is relaxed. Conversation is permitted, even encouraged. Laughter is not forbidden. The atmosphere is almost festive as a gathering of men who have taken vows of renunciation can be. The food is better than the monks' ordinary fare. Normally, they eat simple vegetarian food, bread, vegetables, legumes, occasionally fish. At Christmas, there is meat, provided by the abbey's tenants and patrons. There are additional dishes, treats that appear only at great feasts. Sweet pastries flavored with honey and dried fruits. Spiced wine instead of the weak ale or water usually drunk. But even this abundance is restrained compared to secular feasting. The monks eat well, but not to excess. They celebrate, but with dignity and measure. Their Christmas is about joy, certainly, but it is a joy rooted in spiritual gratitude rather than physical indulgence. They are celebrating the Incarnation, God becoming human, the theological mystery at the heart of Christianity. The feasting is secondary to the worship. The monastery also practices extensive charity during Christmas. The abbey's gates are open to travelers and the poor, who are fed and given shelter. This is partly Christian obligation. The Gospels are explicit about caring for the least, and monks are supposed to embody Christian virtue. But it is also practical. The monastery depends on the support of the surrounding community, on donations and bequests, and the labor of tenants. Being generous at Christmas helps maintain these relationships. There is something moving about monastic Christmas, something pure that is often lost in the excess of secular celebration. These men have chosen to remove themselves from the world, to dedicate their lives to prayer and contemplation. Their Christmas is simpler, quieter, but in some ways more profound. The joy is real, the celebration genuine, but it is all directed toward God rather than toward earthly pleasure. As the days progress toward Epiphany, there is a sense throughout all levels of medieval society that the special time is drawing to a close. The initial excitement has faded. People are growing tired of constant feasting, their stomachs overfull, their heads aching from too much wine and ale. The stores of special food are depleted. The money spent on celebration has created debts that will need to be repaid. There is anticipation of return to ordinary life, to work and routine. But there is also reluctance, a desire to hold on to the magic a little longer. These 12 days have been different, special, a break from the hardship and monotony that characterizes so much of medieval life. No one wants them to end. New Year's Day falls within the 12 days, though as mentioned earlier, the medieval New Year was calculated differently in different places. But regardless of when the calendar year officially turned, the days after Christmas were a time of reflection on the past and anticipation of the future. People thought about the year just ended, its triumphs and tragedies, its harvests and failures, its births and deaths. They wondered what the coming year would bring. Would the harvest be good? Would they stay healthy? Would there be war or peace? Would loved ones survive another year? These questions were not abstract for medieval people. Life was precarious, death always near, the future genuinely uncertain. But there was also hope, embodied in the Christmas season itself. The birth of Christ promised salvation, redemption, the ultimate triumph of good over evil. The return of light after the winter solstice promised that spring would come, that life would renew itself. The community bonds reinforced during the festivities promised that people would face whatever came together, supporting each other through hardship. As we move toward the final days of the Christmas season, toward Epiphany, there is a sense of culmination approaching, of the various threads of the celebration coming together for one final, intense moment before the season ends and ordinary time returns. Let us rest now, allowing the sights and sounds and smells of medieval Christmas to settle in our minds. The great feasts and humble meals, the royal pageantry and monastic simplicity, the sacred services and profane entertainments, all the complex, contradictory elements that made Christmas in the Middle Ages such a rich and remarkable experience. The season is not yet over. One more day remains, one more feast, one more explosion of celebration before the Christmas lights are extinguished and the world returns to winter darkness and daily work. January 6th arrives, the 12th and final day of Christmas, the feast of the Epiphany. This day commemorates the visit of the Magi to the infant Jesus, those mysterious wise men from the east who followed a star to Bethlehem and brought gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. In the medieval imagination, the Magi were transformed into kings, 3 in number, representing the 3 known continents of the world, Europe, Asia, and Africa. Their visit symbolized that Christ came not just for the Jews but for all humanity, that the good news of the gospel was universal. Epiphany is sometimes called Twelfth Night, and it represents the culmination of the Christmas season, the final burst of celebration before the decorations come down and ordinary life resumes. There is an intensity to Epiphany celebrations, a knowledge that this is the last chance to feast and make merry before the long winter months stretch ahead with no festivals to break their monotony. The day begins, as Christmas Day did, with religious services. Churches across medieval Christendom hold special masses for Epiphany, and these services emphasize the theme of revelation, of Christ being revealed to the world. The Gospel reading tells the story of the Magi, and preachers elaborate on its meaning, drawing connections between the gifts brought by the wise men and the nature of Christ: gold for his kingship, frankincense for his divinity, myrrh for his mortality and the death he will suffer. In some regions, there is a tradition of blessing water, salt, and chalk on Epiphany. The blessed chalk is used to mark doorways with the initials of the three magi, traditionally named Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar, along with the year. These markings are meant to bring blessing and protection to the household for the coming year. Even homes that are otherwise bare of decoration will have these chalk marks above their doors, white against dark wood or stone, a visible reminder of faith and hope. Let us return one final time to the Earl's castle, where the Epiphany feast is being prepared. This will be the last great feast of the season, and the Earl is determined to make it memorable. The kitchen staff, exhausted from 12 days of nearly constant work, rally for one final effort. The stores of special foods are nearly depleted, but what remains is being used lavishly, held back deliberately for this culminating celebration. The great hall is decorated one last time, the evergreen boughs that have been up since Christmas Eve now looking somewhat tired and drooping but still fragrant. Additional decorations have been added specifically for Epiphany: gold fabric and gold paper, references to the gold brought by the Magi, draped and hung throughout the hall. The feast that evening is structured around the Epiphany theme. The first course includes dishes decorated with gold leaf, the precious metal applied to pastries and roasted meats, making them shimmer in the candlelight. This is pure ostentation. Gold leaf adds no flavor, serves no nutritional purpose, exists only to demonstrate wealth and to connect the feast to the biblical story of the Magi's gifts. There is a tradition associated with Epiphany called the King's Cake or Twelfth Night Cake. A special cake is baked with a bean or a coin hidden inside. The cake is divided and distributed, and whoever receives the piece containing the hidden object is declared the king or queen of the bean, and given authority to preside over the evening's festivities. This is another inversion tradition, similar to the Lord of Misrule, where someone of potentially low status is temporarily elevated. In the Earl's Hall, the cake is enormous, large enough to provide a piece to everyone present. It is rich with dried fruits, heavily spiced, glazed with sugar that has been colored gold. When it is cut and distributed, the piece with the bean goes to a scullery maid, a girl of perhaps 15 who works in the kitchens and has never sat at a table in the great hall, let alone at the high table. She is brought forward, confused and frightened, and crowned with a wreath of greenery and gold ribbon. She is seated at the high table, next to the Earl himself, and declared the queen of the bean for the evening. The Earl's wife fastens a borrowed brooch to the girl's plain dress. Wine is poured for her into a silver cup. She is served first from every dish that arrives, taking her portions with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the sudden attention and luxury. This tradition could be seen as kind, a moment of generosity and inclusion. But it is also somewhat cruel, giving the girl a taste of a life she can never actually have, then returning her to her ordinary drudgery the next day. The temporary elevation makes the contrast with her real status more stark. Yet the girl seems happy, or at least too stunned to be anything else, and the household treats her role with genuine respect, at least for this one night. The entertainment on Epiphany night is particularly elaborate. A masque is performed depicting the journey of the Magi, with 3 of the Earl's knights dressed in elaborate costumes representing the 3 kings. They enter the hall on horseback, which causes excitement and some chaos, the horses' hooves clattering on the stone floor, servants rushing to manage the animals. The knights bear gifts, actual gold coins, burning incense in censers, and a decorative jar supposedly containing myrrh, which they present to a figure representing the Virgin Mary, played by the Earl's eldest daughter. The masque is accompanied by music and singing, and it has a solemnity despite the theatrical elements. Even in the midst of feasting and celebration, there is recognition of the sacred story being told, of the mystery of incarnation and revelation at the heart of the Epiphany feast. As the evening progresses, there is drinking and dancing, laughter and songs, all the familiar elements of the season's celebrations. But there is also an undercurrent of melancholy, an awareness that this is ending. Tomorrow, the greenery will be taken down. The special candles will be extinguished. The stores of festival food will be locked away or simply exhausted. The servants will rest briefly and then return to their normal duties. The knights and nobles who have gathered for the Christmas season will depart to their own estates. The castle will return to its ordinary rhythms, quieter, more austere, more focused on the business of managing land and maintaining power. Let us leave the castle and visit the village one last time, where Epiphany is being celebrated more modestly but with equal awareness of the season's ending. The village feast is held again in the church hall, and the food is simpler than what is served in the castle but still special. The last of the Christmas ale, roasted meats, bread baked specially for the occasion. There is music and dancing in the village square, despite the cold. The villagers are determined to extract every last moment of celebration from the season. Children run through the darkness carrying torches, their laughter echoing across the frozen fields. Young people court each other with a freedom that will not be permitted once the ordinary rules of conduct are reimposed tomorrow. There is also a practical element to the Epiphany celebrations in the village. This is a time when debts are settled, when accounts are balanced before the new agricultural year begins. People who borrowed grain or tools or money during the hard months before Christmas are expected to repay now, during the relative abundance of the season. Some can do so, others cannot, and there are difficult conversations, negotiations, sometimes arguments about extensions and terms. The village priest makes his rounds, visiting households, offering final blessings for the season. He carries blessed water and sprinkles it in homes, blessing the families and their dwellings, asking God's protection for the year ahead. This is one of his pastoral duties, connecting the sacred mysteries celebrated in church with the everyday lives of his parishioners. As night deepens on this Epiphany evening, fires are built up one last time, in hearths, in the village square, in the castle courtyard. The symbolism of light, so important throughout the Christmas season, reaches its final expression. These fires push back the darkness, provide warmth, serve as gathering points for final conversations and farewells. Around these fires, stories are told. The Christmas season has always been a time for storytelling, for sharing tales both sacred and secular. Tonight, the stories take on a particular character: tales of previous Christmases, memories of seasons past, stories of ancestors and how they celebrated, ghost stories that make children huddle closer to the flames. Medieval people loved ghost stories, despite or perhaps because of the Church's teachings about the afterlife. The long, dark nights of winter were perfect for such tales, and the Christmas season, with its emphasis on the supernatural birth of Christ, seemed to open a door between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Stories of phantoms and revenants, of visits from deceased loved ones, of warnings and prophecies delivered by spirits, these circulated freely, making the night seem full of unseen presences. There is also fortune-telling on Epiphany night, various folk traditions meant to predict the future. Young women perform rituals to learn whom they will marry. Farmers try to predict whether the coming growing season will be successful. These practices exist in the gray area between acceptable folk custom and prohibited superstition, tolerated by the Church as long as they remain relatively harmless and don't involve actual invocation of demons or spirits. As midnight approaches, there is a sense of the season reaching its conclusion. The 12 days have passed. The feasting and celebration that seemed like they would last forever are ending. Tomorrow morning, the world will be different, return to its ordinary state, and there will be months of cold and work before the next festival, before Easter brings another break in the routine. In churches across the land, the decorations are quietly being taken down even as the night continues. The holly and ivy are gathered up and either burned or carried out to the fields to be scattered, returning the greenery to the earth. The special candles are extinguished. The embroidered altar cloths used only for great feasts are carefully folded and stored away. The church returns to its everyday appearance, beautiful still in its stone simplicity, but less adorned, less spectacular. The transformation happens gradually through the night. By dawn, when people emerge from their homes after a few hours of sleep, the physical signs of Christmas will be largely gone. The evergreen boughs removed from doorways. The special decorations packed away. The great halls and churches restored to their normal appearance. But the memory remains. The taste of special foods, the sound of music and laughter, the warmth of fires and fellowship, the spiritual nourishment of services and stories. All of this lingers, sustaining people as they return to the hard work of surviving a medieval winter. Let us witness the dawn of January 7th, the day after Epiphany, the return to ordinary time. The sun rises late, as it still does in January, casting pale light across a landscape that looks much as it did before Christmas began. The fields lie dormant. The bare trees reach skeletal branches toward the gray sky. Smoke rises from chimneys as fires are lit, but the quality of the smoke is different, smaller fires now, more carefully managed, as people begin to husband their fuel supplies more carefully for the months ahead. In the castle, servants move through the great hall, cleaning up the debris of last night's feast. The rushes on the floor, which have been replaced multiple times during the 12 days, are swept out one final time and fresh ones laid down, plain rushes now, without the herbs and flowers that made them fragrant during the festivities. The tables are cleared and the benches stacked. The hall is being restored to its function as a place of business and governance rather than celebration. The Earl meets with his steward and his bailiffs, discussing the state of his estates, reviewing accounts, making plans for the work that needs to be done in the months ahead. The pleasurable suspension of business that characterized the Christmas season is over. Reality has returned, with all its complexities and demands. In the village, people return to their work. Fields must be checked, even though they lie fallow. Livestock must be tended. Tools must be maintained. Structures damaged by winter storms must be repaired. The rhythm of agricultural life reasserts itself, demanding and unforgiving. Children return to their ordinary activities, helping with chores, learning the skills they will need as adults. The freedom and play of the Christmas season becomes a memory, something to look back on during the hard days of winter, something to look forward to when next December arrives. Yet Christmas has left its mark. Bellies are fuller than they were before the season. People have eaten well, built up reserves of fat and energy that will help them survive the cold months. Spirits are renewed, the monotony of winter broken by 12 days of celebration and meaning. Community bonds are strengthened, the social fabric reinforced by shared feasting and worship. There is also the spiritual dimension. For believers, and nearly everyone in medieval Christendom was a believer of some sort, Christmas provided reassurance of God's love, of the promise of salvation. The birth of Christ reminded people that they were not abandoned, that suffering and hardship were not the final word, that redemption was possible. This faith, however complicated and imperfect, genuinely sustained people through lives that were often short and difficult. As the days pass after Epiphany, life settles into the deep winter pattern. January and February stretch ahead, the coldest and darkest months, the time when stores of food begin to run low, when sickness is most likely to strike, when death is most common. Medieval people called this period the hungry gap, the difficult time between the depletion of autumn's harvest and the arrival of spring's first fresh foods. But they faced this difficult time with resources they did not have before Christmas. Physical resources, the food consumed during the season, the rest from labor. Social resources, the renewed bonds of community and family. Spiritual resources, the faith and hope reinforced through sacred ritual and celebration. The memory of Christmas also provides something to look forward to. The cycle will continue. Winter will give way to spring, spring to summer, summer to autumn, autumn to winter again. And when next December comes, when the days grow short and the darkness deep, there will be another Christmas. Another season of light and warmth and celebration. Another reminder that the difficult present is not permanent, that change and renewal are possible, that joy exists even in a hard world. Let us take one final walk through the landscape we have been visiting. The village is quiet now, returned to its everyday appearance. Smoke rises from cottages. A few people move about their business, bundled against the cold. The church stands solid and gray, its doors closed, waiting for the next service, the next baptism or wedding or funeral, the next opportunity to mark the sacred moments of human life. The castle on the hill looms as it always has, a symbol of power and permanence. The earl and his household will remain there, managing their lands, maintaining their position, participating in the complex political networks that connect them to other nobles and ultimately to the king. The Christmas celebrations were a pause in this work, not a replacement for it. The fields stretch out, white with frost if not snow, waiting for spring. Beneath the frozen earth, seeds lie dormant, holding the potential for next year's harvest. The cycle of seasons is ancient and reliable, predating human civilization, continuing regardless of human hopes or fears. The forest at the edge of the village stands dark and deep. It provided the wood that warmed people during Christmas, the game that fed them, the greenery that decorated their homes. It will continue to be a resource and a boundary, a place of both plenty and danger, essential to the economy and imagination of medieval life. As we prepare to leave this medieval Christmas behind, to return to our own time, let us reflect on what we have witnessed. Christmas in the Middle Ages was complex and contradictory, sacred and profane, beautiful and sometimes brutal. It was shaped by genuine faith and by social obligation, by spiritual yearning and by physical need, by ancient traditions and by contemporary circumstances. It was very different from our modern Christmas, with its commercialism and sentimentality, its electric lights and wrapped presents, its emphasis on individual family celebration rather than community-wide festivities. But it was also recognizably the same holiday, celebrating the same story, invoking the same themes of light and darkness, hope and despair, love overcoming fear. The people we have observed, the earl and the peasant, the monk and the knight, the child and the elder, are connected to us across the centuries by shared humanity. They felt joy and sorrow, hope and fear, much as we do. They loved their families, worried about their futures, sought meaning in their lives. The material circumstances were vastly different, but the human experiences were universal and timeless. Medieval Christmas reminds us that celebration is essential to human life, that we need moments of joy and abundance to balance the hardship and monotony of everyday existence. It reminds us that community matters, that we are strengthened by gathering together, by sharing food and stories and rituals. It reminds us that faith, however we define it, provides comfort and meaning, connecting us to something larger than our individual selves. As you drift toward sleep, carry with you these images of medieval Christmas. The great fires blazing in stone hearths. The smell of roasting meat and exotic spices. The sound of bells ringing across frozen landscapes. The taste of ale and wine and special foods. The warmth of community and family. The glow of candles reflecting off stone and wood and the faces of people gathered together. Let these images comfort you, as the Christmas season comforted medieval people. Let them remind you that humans have always sought light and darkness, warmth and cold, joy and hardship. Let them connect you to the long chain of humanity stretching back through the centuries, all the people who have celebrated and suffered, hoped and endured. The medieval world is distant now, separated from us by vast changes in technology, society, belief. But it is also present, living in our traditions and stories, in the shape of our festivals and the rhythms of our year. Christmas as we know it grew from medieval roots, carrying forward elements of that earlier celebration even as it transformed them. Rest now in the peace of this knowledge. The story has been told. The season celebrated. The connections made across time and space, linking past to present, the medieval to the modern, those long-dead celebrants to those of us alive today. The fires of medieval Christmas have long since burned to ash. The feasts have been consumed. The songs have faded. The people who celebrated have returned to dust. But the spirit remains, the human need for celebration and meaning, for light and warmth, for community and hope. Sleep well, knowing that you are part of this great continuity, this endless human story. Dream of Christmas past, of stone halls and thatched cottages, of bells and candles, of snow and firelight. The medieval Christmas is over, but its echoes continue, resonating through the centuries, touching us still with its mixture of faith and feast, darkness and light, hardship and hope. Let the peace of that distant season settle over you now. Let the weight of history, the long perspective of centuries, quiet your mind and ease your spirit. The world sleeps. The seasons turn. The story continues. And you, traveler through time, can rest now in the knowledge that Christmas, in all its forms, across all the centuries, speaks to something essential in the human heart. Sleep peacefully. The medieval Christmas wraps around you like a warm cloak, sheltering you from the cold, lighting your way through the darkness. And the echoes of ancient celebrations sing you softly into sleep,